Hello everyone and welcome to session 11 and 12 of the Business School Leaders Forum, brought to you by GoToWebinar by LogMeIn. Today I'm joined by two speakers who will be presenting on two presentations. The first will be brought to you by Athena Singh, Director of Athena School of Management, who will be presenting on internationalisation within business education, how to bridge the gap between cultures and countries. The second will be brought to you by Victor Hedenberg, Business Development Manager at BGA, who will be presenting on impact and sustainability and understanding BGA's accreditation process. So in a moment, I'm going to pass over to Adita, but obviously at the end of this session, we are going to have a joint Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, feel free to type them into the question tab as we go along, and hopefully we get a chance to answer all of them. If you don't, the speakers have kindly agreed that we will pass the questions on to them and they'll get in touch. So without further ado, I will now pass over to Adita.
Thank you so much, Paul. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whichever part of the world you're in. My name is Athena Singh. I'm the director of the Athena School of Management located in Bombay in India. It's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to be talking to all of you online right now. Before I start, I do hope and pray for all your families and you that all of you are safe and sound given the current situation which is there all over the world with the pandemic. And isn't it interesting? Because of this entire problem of the pandemic, what we're going to talk about today, internationalization with business education, becomes so much more important. But let's get this very clear. In today's world, internationalization is critical when it comes to business schools. I don't think any of us can exist without it. But how exactly do you bridge those gaps between cultures and countries is something that we'll try to do over the next few minutes. And hopefully by the end of it, we have a bit of better ideas. We'll cover a global context, which typically covers more from the developing economy perspective, from India and the emerging economy perspective, from what Athena has done, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, how perhaps COVID would affect all of this, and of course, also look at what are the different ways we can integrate it into pedagogy. Now, from a global context, of course, I mean from more of a developed economy perspective, which is, of course, North America, that is USA and Canada. You have Europe and, of course, APAC. Internationalism is something which is already happening. The basic, tenet of that, of course, is the international student diversity which you have. According to studies in the top 200 MBA programs, more than 50% of the students are from across the world. They're international. So that diversity in student intake is obviously there. However, there's a slight difference between Europe and North America. When you look at Europe, you see there's truly a diverse intake. So you see people coming in from obviously Europe, which itself is very diverse, from North America, from MENA, that's Middle East and North Africa, from the developed countries, from India, from China, all over the world. But when you look at North America, on the other hand, you see a larger intake coming in, typically more from China and from India. Of course, this growth has got further accentuated in the past 3 to 4 years, where a lot of MBA programs have moved to get STEM certification, which actually is something which is very much in demand in a lot of developing economies. The second part, of course, is international faculty. Now, another study shows that of the top 200 MBA programs, at least if you see, most of them have 37% of the faculty are actually people who are from not their own countries, they're international. All right. So what happens is, of course, that gives a very good global flavor where they come with their own perspectives, they come with their own inputs, their own concepts, and that's something which really enriches the program. Global alliances are something which is already there in the global context. If you see things like the CEMS, which is there, for example, to some extent, Erasmus would cover some part of it, where schools actually are participating with each other, exchanging ideas, thoughts, concepts, pedagogies, and so much more. The past few decades, you've also seen joint programs come into the flavor, where your programs which are spread across different, institutions, and they jointly do it. For example, the CEIBS program, which is there, for example, or the Triumph MBA, for example, which actually encompasses more countries, more geographies, more schools, and hopefully more students coming into the entire mix. Also, some schools have moved into global campuses. Of course, one of the biggest examples would be INSEAD. The first campus, of course, was in Fontainebleau, and of course, now they expanded it to Singapore as the second campus, which is now a co-equal campus. A third one is coming in Abu Dhabi, and there's so many more for it. But the biggest change that we've observed in the past decade is schools moving, especially in the developed economies, from a sourcing mindset to a partnering mindset. And what I mean by that is, where the internationalization interest for so many years was just to get students who were diverse from the geographic perspective. Now you see them, they actually want to partner with schools so they get new ideas, new opportunities for growth and new inroads. And that bodes very, very well also for schools which come from an emerging economy, an Indian context, for example. Now, to give you an example, while schools, for example, business schools have always been around in business schools, all right, for a long time, the developing economy also, there were not too many. However, if you see in the past 2 decades or so, there's been a massive proliferation of business schools in developing economies and emerging economies. Now, of course, when they started, a lot of them were very, inward looking. Perhaps that was the nature of the entire game at that time. But now, with these economies, for example, India, China, of course, happened 2 decades ago. Now you have Africa coming up. With these economies, with these countries looking more global, more from an international perspective, the business schools themselves also are actually expanding the international and the worldview. Why? One of the major reasons is that a lot of multinational companies now exist in these countries, and they want talent which is of course globally attuned. That's very important. And what we've seen is there's a change in the mindset of these schools from becoming value suppliers, which was basically for want of a better word, taking in concepts, taking in pedagogical inputs, which were already there in other business schools and other economies, probably just doing a bit of change, repackaging them and representing them to the students, to becoming value providers, where they're actually designing solutions that are customized to their own environments, to their own corporate requirements, to their own students' perspective, which is phenomenal because that shows an evolution of the schools over there. A lot of schools in India now and in the emerging world are looking at faculty and pedagogical alliances because you understand that there's a demographic explosion in the emerging world. You have a lot of people coming up who are now entering business schools and in that categorization which is there. And there is definitely a desire, there's almost a sense in a lot of schools that they want to catch up very, very fast to global standards. And one of the core tenets to do that is to have the best possible faculty and the best possible teaching methodologies. And that is something that is driving a lot of this within schools in the emerging economies. Another important thing is a lot of schools, and I would say perhaps even from Athena, from that perspective, there's a very big desire to get a seat on the table, to be taken seriously by global peers. So the need for global peer school, recognition, that perception has become very important, and that's driving a lot of internationalization too. Of course, we also observe the rise of joint programs, and I think this is happening also because schools in the existing economies of North America and Europe are realizing that there is so much of scope for partnering with schools from the emerging world. So we've seen joint programs coming up where students perhaps do a 1 year, say in India or Africa or China, and the second day they move to Europe or they move to North America. That gives a very unique blend where the students understand their local economy, the domestic perception which is there. And of course, when they move on to the international partner school, they understand a global perception. And perhaps that in a way also helps them actually increase the entire, as when it comes to placements and so on and so forth, which is there. Sorry, I can just skip a couple over there. All right. So types of internationalization. Well, it's just like a pyramid structure. The most basic, of course, is right at the bottom is the student intake. When you diversify the intake, the next level which you go up is, of course, when you get in faculty, both permanent and visiting from across the world. And also the same thing happens to research. Also, we actually research not on problems only in your own country or your own geography, but also across different continents and across the world. Very important is the internationalization of student experience, and this relates to something which I'm going to talk a bit later, which is the experience quotient which is there, the EQ which is there. And that is something which is very, very important. This includes, of course, immersions, study trips, exchanges, joint projects, and so forth. The next part on the pyramid, of course, is the internationalization of the program and the delivery. So where you come in for the joint programs, perhaps, or for pathway programs, and the delivery also, which you do maybe, in a joint program sometimes in the home country, and then, of course, in the partner country, which is there. And then, of course, internationalization of the campus and the infrastructure which is there, which again, of course, depends where you actually have global campuses, for example, as we talked about in INSEAD, for example, or for that matter, HALT as a school, which is the OSCEMA, which is there. And of course, even if you have a single campus, you make sure it's at a global infrastructure level so that you can actually relate to your peers. So these are different pyramids when it comes down to an internationalization pyramid, which is there. Now, the pathway to internationalization, now, first and foremost, I want to tell you is that there is no one size fits all. There are different pathways to different internationalization because the entire environment may be so different. The student base may be very, very different. So that's something which one has to remember. The first part is, of course, getting contemporary and international courses in place. it is not important, at least from an Indian context. When I'm talking about Athena, for example, we may not be only interested in what's relevant in India today. We may be seeing what's relevant perhaps in Europe or North America. What is coming up? What is the next major trend which is coming? For example, emotional intelligence, for example, or machine learning or artificial intelligence, and integrating that into our programs, into our courses, so that actually helps our students become future ready and global ready. That's very, very critical. Similarly, for example, there are a lot of schools which are there now in North America or, for example, in Europe, who look at spirituality and emotional quotient, something which they want to actually adapt to. That's very, very important. The next part, of course, is international student immersions and exchanges. Exchanges are critical in this entire phase, because that's the time when your students go as ambassadors to partner schools, stay there for some time, their students come over to your school. That's the time when there's a very long-term imprint on what is happening and what is not happening. That becomes very, very critical for a long-term perspective. Faculty exchanges, where you have residents, faculty, scholars coming in and going out to different colleges and schools, which is very, very important. So, for example, you have a faculty, for example, who comes in from France to India, from India to Portugal, so on and so forth, and joint research projects, perhaps on international subjects which are of interest both to the parent school and to the partner school. The programs, of course, there are pathways where, of course, you do some programs a few years here and a few years there. Joint programs, which happen again, which, like I said, becoming quite the flavor these days, and dual degrees, which are there. The next part is something which is very interesting: global internships and placements. This is a trend which has come up in the past 5 to 8 years, where you start seeing students who want to not intern in their own countries. They want to intern in other countries. That becomes very, very important. Now, that's very important because it gives them a global exposure. And a lot of schools are doing that. So, for example, you may be a Europe-based school, but your student may want to intern in Singapore, for example, or they may want to intern in India, for example. Similarly, you have Indian students who may want to intern in North America, for example, or Europe or Southeast Asia. That is becoming very important. How does one facilitate that, again, is very critical in the entire picture, but that's something that's important. And that, of course, leads to perhaps international and global placements, which, of course, maybe in Europe, because of the EU, may not sound that big a deal, but trust me, when it comes to more developing economies, that is a very big deal. Global placements, international placements play a very, very strong part in the long-term branding and value addition for the students from the school's perspective. Very important, of course, in memberships and accreditation. What we're doing here: membership of the Association of MBAs, that is AMBA, membership of the Business Graduates Association, that is the BGA, getting accreditation into place. That definitely gives you a far better and a structured way, perhaps more sooner than later, to come into the international fold of things. How does one integrate this into the pedagogy? All right, so one is, of course, as I talked about, the experience quotient. Generation Z, and that is the generation just coming into business schools now, is as interested in the intangibles as it is interested in the tangibles. It wants experience. It wants to understand how does it get that wisdom. What is the entire environment with which it can understand what is happening. So that learning experience has become critical. Of course, given the current context where we are seeing, where you're actually seeing business schools are perhaps having to adapt because of the COVID crisis to online and virtual experiences, that's going to be even more important. So is it a challenge to increase the experience quotient for the learning for a student in a business school today? Yes, it definitely is. Is it an opportunity? It definitely is, because it can be the differentiator for a lot of schools as compared to their competition. Another major thing is the flow of faculty, which is important, both inbound and outbound. How many faculty go to partner schools, teach there for a session or for a term or a few modules, and vice versa? How many international faculty come to you and teach with you over there? That is very important, because in the end, of course, that is the cornerstone of all business schools, right? The learning experience which is there. Again, because of the coronavirus crisis, that has stopped completely, but again, that's an opportunity, because as more and more schools have gone and started embracing the online way of teaching or the virtual way of learning, some for the short term, some for the longer term, who knows, this actually becomes much easier for one to facilitate. And I think that's something that's very, very important. The curriculum and the experience design becomes critical when you're looking at, from an international perspective, and this includes, of course, things as simple as getting kind of virtual internships, which is very, very important. Getting virtual projects into place, which will be global in nature typically. Getting in student exchanges, not only from a physical exchange, but also from an exchange of ideas. Perhaps getting speakers to come in who may not be from your home country, who may be from some other country completely. These are going to be very, very important. Cross-cultural exchange of ideas and perception is critical, again, if you really want this thing to move. And that is something which becomes a very big challenge We say we are in an international world, in a global world, but having said that, we still are in a situation where there's a lot of resistance to something which is new or something which is different. I think we've all heard in our schools, senior management telling people that, what, this is how we've been doing things for ages, and that's how we're going to do things. That doesn't work in the brave new world where things are changing so dramatically. So, one has to be able to exchange these ideas and be able to embrace them. Is it easy? In many cases, it is not easy. But then I think that is where we, as the stakeholders, as the principal stakeholders, need to help the other stakeholders in our institutions understand the critical importance of that, because that is going to be essential, especially if, as a lot of people say globalization is ending. I beg to differ. I think it's going to become even more hyper globalized. So getting cultural ideas of exchange is going to be very, very important. The next part, of course, is MOOCs, and this is a very interesting topic. I think when the MOOCs came out, a lot of us in management education didn't perhaps take them too seriously. A few years later, we started looking at them as serious threats. I think now a lot of schools, with again the crisis which has come in the past few months, have started embracing MOOCs. Both Coursera and edX, of course, have partnership with business schools. And one feels that this is a fantastic way to actually embrace MOOCs to leverage the learning experience to a next level, especially when it comes to asynchronous learning, for example. This is something which can be a tremendous value addition. I must share this, that at Athena, we've been able to do this in a very successful way and been able to leverage it. Will this part of MOOCs stay beyond this entire lockdown phase, and can it be successfully integrated into the long-term program? That is something which is left to be seen. But remember, it is phenomenal when a student in India, for example, can learn from a professor at MIT, from Rochester, for example, from Delft in the Netherlands, or from Waseda in Tokyo. There is a tremendous amount of value in that. Of course, one has to be able to leverage to the right amount which is there. Global virtual projects is something which are coming up, and we've had a wonderful experience with this in the past few months. I'll probably share this in the next couple of slides when we talk about what we did at Athena. But I think this is something which I would suggest a lot of business schools can embrace to doing this, because it's something which is very interesting and it's actually given a lot of dividends. The entire framework for learning for a lot of us has been KBD, which is knowledge, being, doing. Now, in that part, knowledge is going to become more and more delivered online, and that is something which is good, because it actually saves a lot of time for us for the being and doing part which is there. We keep telling people a lot in the brave new world which is coming in. A lot of us should keep teaching students on how to give the right answer. That's not needed. The answers have become democratized. It's there, out there. Perhaps what we need to focus is encourage our students to be able to ask the right questions, because if they can do that, the answers will definitely come along. So how's Athena's internationalization journey been? It's been fairly interesting. We are a young business school, mind you. We started only in the year 2012, so this is going to be our 8th anniversary. But when Athena started, we were very clear that there are going to be 2 core aspects we're going to focus on. One is experiential learning for our students, and one is internationalization. So we were very lucky for that. We had that as a core focus. There's a lot of buy-in from the management, from the board, from the faculty, from the students. And this is what I recommend to everyone. Please make sure that when you go on this path of internationalization, you have buy-in from all your stakeholders. That becomes very, very important in order for this to take it forward. We were very clear, all options were on deck. So what that meant was we're never going to say no to an opportunity to an option. We're going to try to do it. Some would work, some may not work. That's all right. Without a few failures, there's never success. So let's go forward and do it. The beginning, we started, with baby steps. The first step was looking at study trips, which were there, and immersions in partner schools. We did that for a couple of years. Very successful, very, very good feedback. Also gave us to help us understand what are the pros and cons of internationalization when it comes to immersions and exchanges. The next step was actually participating in global meetings, such as what we're doing right now, for example. Only for global conferences, interacting with peers and business schools from all over the world. So, for example, the AMBA Global Conference, which happened every year. Last year it happened in Istanbul. Right now we're doing this, for example. It's a very, very good way to increase your network, understand what is happening across over there, and then take things out from there. At the same time, of course, we also started looking at integrating this further into pedagogy. So I must share this with you. All students in Athena have an option to pursue an international internship. About 50% of our students will go for an international internship during the course of the program. In the past few years, they've been interning across Europe, be it the Netherlands, be it Turkey, Germany, Italy, so on and so forth. And that is phenomenal because the kind of perspectives they come back with is very, very interesting. It actually changes the entire horizons, which is there. Similarly, we give all our students an option in the second year to actually pursue an international exchange or an international immersion, and most of them choose that. Again, that's a phenomenal way when your student goes, stays in campus for a partner campus for a few months, studies with their faculty and comes back. The kind of inputs they come back with is phenomenal, and they act as ambassadors for your school and also for the partner school. What's happened, of course, is, and I think I'll cover that in the COVID proofing, is that because of this, you were able to actually leverage this to get deep partnerships. We said, okay, we've learned a lot, and what we've done is we've actually gone into joint programs. So the past couple of years, we've been able to launch joint programs, which have been very, very interesting for us. So we have a joint MBA program currently with the University at Albany, that is the State University of New York in the US, where the students do their first year with us and second year in the US, and they get an MBA program. We have partnership with like Kanam IM, which is there, of course, in Paris, which is for a master's management program. We have a similar program running with the IMTBS, just on the outskirts of Paris, again in France. We also have a joint program, which is a master's in luxury and brand management with the Athena School of Business, again in France. And we've also just launched a joint global executive MBA program in partnership with the Kedge Business School, where the students get to study across India, France, China, and if they do a couple of specialized programs, even in the US and Australia. That's global internationalization. That gives you a true perspective on what you're doing and what you're not doing. Now, I must advise all of you that it's not easy. It's not that you launch a program and it becomes overnight success. It takes investment, not only by way of money, but also by way of actually your time and your energy, and of course, a bit of emotional investments also. So it takes a few years to develop. You have to make sure that internally you have that stakeholder buy-in to support it to grow. Slow and steady wins the race over here. Now, we realized somewhere around February that COVID would become a global problem. So we COVID-proofed ourselves. The biggest problem which happened, of course, were our exchanges, which were supposed to be international, our internships, which were supposed to be international in nature. What we did was we moved that into a virtual internships. So in April and May, when a lot of schools were struggling with physical internships, the Athena students were doing the global virtual internships across Singapore, across Dubai, across Israel, across South Africa, across the Netherlands, of course in India, but all of this was happening virtually. Were there some teething issues? There were, but let me tell you, at the end of the entire program, the students have come out far richer. Remember, I talked about projects. So at the same time, we started experimenting with global virtual projects. We just finished our first one, which was in partnership with the SGH Warsaw School of Economics. SGH Warsaw is the oldest business school in Poland, where we had 66 students from both the schools participating across 10 teams. There are 30 Zoom meetings, 500 man hours, and at the end of the entire project, which was about 1.5 months long, we had 10 fantastic business ideas and project ideas across things as very sustainable fashion solutions. So baby boomers, for example, out there. We had solutions which were there for the environment, which was there. It was phenomenal. And medical pharmaceutical research. So a lot of inputs. And remember, these are students who never met each other physically. These are teams which did this completely virtually over Zoom. Of course, there were faculty mentors, but a lot of this was done with the students by themselves. And now we are in a problem because the students are coming to us and saying, we want to do much more of this. What we've also done is we've enabled platforms. You realize to perhaps move beyond only business school platforms. So currently, for example, Athena partnering with Localized, which is an interesting platform which gets you localized, global and localized inputs when it comes to getting you ready for the corporate world. We're also partnering with Inside Sherpa because they have a lot of interesting global virtual programs which is there. I recommend this to all of you. Just check them out. They're very, very interesting solutions out there for them. The COVID menace. It is a menace. But is it an opportunity? It may be. We'll see that. So this is a once in a generation. No, it's a once in a 3-generation problem, right? The last time we had something like this was the Spanish influenza. No offense to my Spanish friends, which happened in 1918, 1920. So exactly 100 years later, it came back. 6 months ago, if all of us had been told that, you know what, you're not going to go to Budapest for your conference for MBA and BGA, you're going to have to do this virtually, you're going to be locked down in your homes for about 3 months, 4 months, would have said, what are you talking about? But that's exactly what's happened. No school in the world probably could have planned for this, but it's here. So it is a crisis, or is it an opportunity, or both? I would say it's both. Initially, it was a crisis of confidence, a crisis of communication, but now it's become an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to take ourselves to the next level. Where's the problem? The problem, of course, is going to be the global mobility and the travel. Let's be very honest. I mean, and I think this is something which all schools have realized, that this is severely affecting our travel. When it comes to the intakes for this year, which is for some of us starting August and September, we already are having student deferments coming into place. Why? Because even if our home countries are not in a lockdown, their home countries may be in lockdown. Of course, there's also a threat of the pandemic coming in waves. So essentially, at least for the first semester, there's a very severe question on mobility and travelability. This again is important by way of exchange of faculty, international exchanges, international internships. All of that is something that is now for all, on cold storage for some time. So this is a problem which is there. But conversely, that's given to a rise of virtuality and virtualization. A lot, and I think this is something which a lot of us have discussed over the past few months. We had so many management, senior management, schools, ecosystems which were resistant to getting digital. That has changed completely because it's been forced upon us in a way. And a lot of schools have actually been able to embrace that. That virtualization, that digitalization, going online actually has helped internationalization at another level, because a lot of time barriers, cost barriers, effort barriers which were there initially don't exist anymore. It doesn't matter when I'm sitting in Bombay or I'm in Paris or London, in Montevideo, for example, or Melbourne or New York. We can all talk, we can all communicate, perhaps at the same time. Of course, some of us may be sleep deprived with the time zone which is there, or with the virtual thing which is there. So this is going to change the entire aspect of internationalization as we see it. Of course, are we coming closer, growing apart? I think we're coming closer and closer. Technology is becoming even better. And of course, we have to understand that the pandemic and the crisis is not going to remain forever, right? I mean, we're going to get a vaccine or a cure, touch wood, already sometime or the later. And of course, those physical meetings will again start. But yes, what it has done this phase has helped us, prepared us to come closer together through virtualization, through digitalization, and perhaps we're going to be even more closer than we thought before. A lot of barriers with regards to time, effort, mobility is actually being overcome. Domestic or global, that's become a very important question. I was talking to a couple of schools and they were saying that they had a lot of intakes internationally. The coming year, they will look at these intakes becoming very domestic in nature. And I think perhaps from a short-term perspective, that's something which is going to happen. But that's a very short-term perspective. I think if you look at the past records, we always see that, yes, you may have a couple of years where international students may start coming to you. But let's understand, humanity as a species, students as a body, always want to go out there and explore. And this, the MBA programs, the management programs are something which gives them such a major tool and opportunity to go out and see the world. So that is something, it's a genie which is once out of the bottle, you really can't, cap it again. So that desire to be truly globalized, to know people from different cultures, to learn with them, to work with them, to add value is something which is definitely not going to go away in any short time for sure. That's definitely there. So what are the opportunities? The opportunities is that institutions want to internationalize. I think there'll be a very small percentage of institutions will say that we do not want to internationalize further than what we are today. Everyone realizes that is the only way to go. In fact, a couple of sessions earlier, we were talking, and one of the speakers said a lot of schools may actually look at merging in the near future. Now, the question is, will the schools which merge be only from the same country or the same geography? Or could you look at transcontinental mergers? That's a very interesting perspective one has to see. We're going to see more outreach coming from Europe and North America towards the developing economies. It's also demographics. It is also the demand-supply imbalance, which is there, which is a very good thing, because I think we need more outreach coming in from Europe, from North America, from the APAC region, for example, to the emerging economies, who will benefit a lot because they're going to get value addition by way of knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and also perhaps some joint programs and proper peer learning. Diversification perhaps also equals future proofing, right? I mean, that's becoming very important in this world. And I think this is something which actually, makes a lot of sense by the coronavirus thing, which is there. Remember, a lot of schools have already started STEM-based diversification, which is there. They look at AI-based programs, machine learning programs, which are there. So I think that is something which is there to stay again. So diversification may be critical. And by diversification, I mean geographical diversification to future-proof programs which are there, because who knows what's going to come tomorrow. And perhaps this is going to actually leverage into deeper partnerships. Gone are the days when schools would say, okay, what, we can do just a study trip with you, an immersion with you, we can just, source students from this country. We're going to look at more and more country, campuses and schools are going to come closer by way of joint programs, by way of dual programs, or have partnership, co-campuses, campuses within campuses. A couple of schools in France are doing with actually inviting global business schools to start campuses within their campus itself, for example. Merge in, perhaps intercontinental mergers happening with schools. We're probably seeing this happening much more in the next few years. And I think the world is going to be a better place for it. And business schools are going to definitely be a better place for it. Challenges, there's a massive hesitation in international travel as of now. But I feel that's a short-term challenge which is there. I think in the next 6 to 7 months, maybe 8 months at the most, we'll see that change. Will business travel go back to the level which was there before? Perhaps not. Will it be there? It'll definitely be there typically. Problems is there with pseudo-nationalism, but that is something more in the political space which is there. We have to make sure that as schools, we perhaps don't get caught up in it. Very important. Online versus traditional versus blended. I think a lot of us perceive online education, online MBAs as possibly a threat to the traditional program. We perceive it in a different way. We look at that as a force multiplier. I think the time has come when we actually co-opt online-based learning, both from our own internal institutions as well as partner institutions, and make it into a blended program. Shorter fees, shorter courses, lesser fees. Well, that is a business-based problem which all of us have to see. Maybe it is a good opportunity, maybe it is not. One has to see it, and we have to understand that learning has moved into skill-based learning now. It's not only about knowledge-based learning. Companies, corporates, especially with the gig economy coming up now, with work from home coming up, we have to be ready to actually upgrade the skills of the students studying with us, so they're relevant not even today, but also in the near future. That's going to be very, very important. And that's about it with me. I think I've just about stayed in time. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking to all of you. Whatever questions you have, please share with Paul, and I'm sure we'll address it in a bit time later. This is my email ID out there. You can reach out to me anytime. I'm out on LinkedIn also, and perhaps I can be of value. We can teach you how we did further things at Athena. Thank you so much to all of you. Godspeed and God bless.
Thank you, Aditya. That was fantastic. So I'm going to pass over to Victor now, who's going to present the second part of this session. So we'll just get Victor set up. Okay, Victor, ready when you are.
Great. Hello, everyone, and many thanks for taking the time today to join the session. My name is Victor Hedenberg, and I've been working at Understanding BGA here in London now for more than 4 years in various roles, but my current role has been focused on the development of the Business Graduates Association, everything from the establishment of membership to accreditation services to the actual outreach to schools across the world, which has allowed me to travel to the many corners of the planet and visit your wonderful campuses and colleagues. So let's start today with a question. Suppose you wanted to be able to run a marathon in 6 months' time. What do you do? Well, despite all the ludicrous solutions out there that guarantee instant and easy results, the truth of the matter is that you cannot accomplish your goals without working hard and being consistent. Nothing in life comes easy and by itself, and taking shortcuts won't get you there. So let's return to our metaphor right now. You know you want to be fit for a marathon, so you visit a gym or a fitness center because you realize that you want to have to work hard and achieve your goals. Now, there are a few ways this can be done. A common approach is to go to a fitness instructor in a gym who will give you a set of instructions to follow. In most cases, this will be a prescriptive approach. The fitness instructor will give you a standard plan to get you where you want, a standard plan that's been used for many previous clients. Now, we know that while a standard plan may work for some, it may not work so well for others due to genetic differences, diets, and previous conditioning. A cookie cutter approach tends not to have the same effect on everyone. And to be completely honest, in some cases, it may have undesirable effects and get you injured. So not too optimal now, is it? But what if there was another approach? Suppose instead the instructor at the fitness center sat down with you and discussed your goals and what you wanted to achieve. You get paired with an instructor who has run a marathon before, and they design a plan for you that's optimized in terms of diet, in terms of training regime, and after taking several samples. This tailored approach is bound to yield optimal results, isn't it? Well, the point of the metaphor is to see the person wanting to run a marathon as a business school. The gym with all the training equipment alongside the fitness instructor is the accreditation agency. So regardless of which gym you go to, you will have to work hard utilizing the equipment to improve. However, as stated previously, there are different gyms and instructors. Some will give you a prescriptive approach and others will tailor that approach to your goals. It should come as no surprise then that the latter is BGA. So now that the metaphor has been given, I can divulge a little bit of background as to why BGA exists and our reasoning behind it. You see, we have been in the industry of accrediting business schools for a long time now, since the 1980s, in fact, focusing our efforts on accrediting the MBA program through AMBA. So we know the positive feedback that accreditation agencies receive, and on the flip side, the negative feedback they receive. Being too prescriptive, we have been told, has put many institutions in a stranglehold, depriving them of innovation and experimentation. If a dean doesn't follow the criteria set before the accreditation agency, they risk losing their certificate, their job, and, well, probably the reputation of the entire business school. So they play it safe. But now tell me something here. How can a business school teach entrepreneurial thinking when itself cannot act this way? It's like being taught by a man who doesn't know how to fish. This is just not optimal. That is why with the foundation of BGA, it was decided that rather than being prescriptive and narrow, it would instead allow for business schools to establish a mission and strategic objectives that were particular to them without compromising the business school's freedom to innovate, and then measuring the success of meeting those objectives. Thus, BGA's accreditation process is an impact-based accreditation that accredits the whole business school. But you know, there were more reasons for the establishment of BGA. Our CEO, Andrew Main Wilson, was the former chairman of the United Nations Prime, and most of you should be familiar with this organization. The issue, however, is that no matter how good Prime's intentions are in realizing the profile of sustainability in business schools around the world, its lack of funding and lack of no quality assurance means that much of its potential is left unrealized. So it was after his term as chairman when we discussed that we wanted to revive our old brand, the Business Graduates Association, which was actually our name in 1967, and weave it within the principles of responsible management and sustainability. At the end of the day, we have one planet and one ecosystem. All business leaders must understand this and strive to find commercial solutions that are sustainable for the planet in the long run. It is why, aside from just offering an accreditation process that embeds the principles of responsible management and sustainability, BGA spends a considerable amount of time on research and promotion of these topics through its Business Impact magazine and events. If you haven't already, I'd urge you to visit our website and simply click Insight and then Business Impact to read our articles and research. So, let's take a deep dive into the cornerstone of BGA's accreditation process, namely impact. Though the BGA accreditation process does make use of general criteria based on best industry practice, these are not only the only determining factors for schools to achieve a successful accreditation outcome. A fundamental part to achieving BGA accreditation is demonstrating measurable impact, positive impact on stakeholders. So let's create a little scenario here. Let's assume that you have established a business school called the Executive Academy. The Executive Academy is everything but a normal business school. It doesn't offer many degree programs. Actually, in fact, it actually specializes more in stackable certificates, such as digital marketing, corporate finance, and managerial accounting. It hires both professionals as well as academics to deliver its courses, and it's continuously offering new courses with new content for lifelong learners. Its objective? To become a leading school in the area of stackable certificates and support the advancement of people's careers. Sounds pretty neat, right? Well, sadly, this school would be disqualified from most accreditations. It simply doesn't run like a normal business school. But what about its stakeholders? What do they think? What if the Academy could prove that its courses are making a tremendous impact on its community and stakeholders? Sometimes it can be really difficult to prove and improve these things. But that is where BGA accreditation comes in. Because apart from just being an accreditation that audits the business school, BGA is also highly consultative with the aim to improve the various functions of the business school as well as its programs. BGA utilizes a system called the Continuous Impact Model, or shortened CIM, to help schools evaluate their impact on stakeholders, spanning across 6 dimensions. The CIM allows schools to focus their attention towards their strengths and further develop them. So let's go back to the Executive Academy for one moment. One of its strategic objectives is to be able to say with certainty that taking their managerial accounting diploma course will help young accountants advance their careers. So utilizing the CIM, we'd make use of the graduate achievement dimension. To create measurable impact metrics, we'd look at a framework kind of like this, with input, activity, outputs, outcome, and finally impact. In this scenario, the metric we're looking at is career advancement for the accounting graduates. We'll measure this using 3 years worth of available data. And the input we can use in this instance is to understand what might be having the most impact in terms of investing in good faculty and teachers for the course. So let's, for instance, look at this and say that we've increased our input for faculty budget. Well, what's the activity that we take with this available money? Well, we hire new faculty members and perhaps a few extra practitioners. What's the output of this? Well, we can organize more courses, more one-to-ones with students, perhaps even CCA lectures, which are shorter types of lectures that you would have. And then finally, what's the outcome of this? Well, we see the program satisfaction going up quite clearly based on the more one-to-ones, smaller classrooms, and perhaps more tailored courses. And then finally, the impact of this entire thing. And we can see that not only is there an outcome in terms of program satisfaction, but the actual impact you have on their careers, on your students' careers, is tremendous. A definite improvement for the Executive Academy. Now, this type of framework, though recommended, is not the only way to measure impact, but it is helpful. So due to the amount of work required to develop one metrics, we usually only ask schools to prepare and develop about 10 metrics that can be directly linked to the school's key strategic objectives. The more thorough these are, the better chance the school will have in achieving accreditation. So now that we have established how the continuous impact model works, let me quickly provide an overview of the full accreditation process and the related stages. The accreditation process consists of 3 separate stages, namely the application stage, development stage, and finally, the assessment stage. So to begin the accreditation process, business schools must submit 3 documents, namely an application form, which consists of a summary of the school's programs, objectives, structures, students, and faculty. Secondly, they must sign a cost schedule agreeing the costs associated to the accreditation process. And then finally, a letter of intent signed by the dean of the business school. Once these materials have been reviewed and approved by BGA, the school moves on to the development stage, where the school is paired with a mentor from our network and begins work on creating their impact metrics using our continuous impact model, just like the example you saw before. And once these metrics are complete and the mentor approves the school's work, the metrics are sent for approval by BGA's accreditation board. The board may provide additional suggestions or give the school the go-ahead to proceed towards the final stage, which is, of course, the assessment stage. In the assessment stage, schools will need to draft 2 separate documents. The first is the self-assessment form, or SAF, as we call it. And secondly is the self-audit report, or SAR. The SAF is a data-driven document where your school provides a thorough details and information on 2 sample programs that you submit. Usually, this would consist of an undergraduate and a postgraduate program, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case every time. If the programs are different enough, you may have a master's program or 2 master's programs that you submit that focus on entirely different things. The SAR, on the other hand, is a narrative document. And think of this as your business school's ability to tell its story. How and why does it meet the 5 areas of BGA accreditation criteria? The SAR relies heavily on the data provided in the SAF and the SIM documents, neatly tying everything together into a nice little story about your business school. And so once these documents are completed, a peer review team will be organized by the business school, or for the business school, sorry. And AMBA and BGA works with more than 100 assessors around the world, giving schools the final say if they're happy with the organized peer review team. Typically, 3 assessors and members of the accreditation team at BGA will make a site visit. And the site visit basically consists of examining facilities, interviewing students and faculty, reviewing provided documents, and going over future plans for the school together with the senior leadership team. And very lately, we've been able to demonstrate this in a virtual method as well. And what's great about the actual assessment visit is that schools receive verbal feedback on whether they are successful in attaining accreditation. So typically, schools can receive 5 or 3-year accreditation cycles. In cases where they don't meet the criteria, they will be deferred and given a rescheduled visit. The 2-day period is highly consultative, where the peer review team is actively engaged in providing schools with achievable future objectives and recommendations. So then you may ask, how long does the BGA accreditation process take? Well, we've designed the process to allow schools to go at their own pace, but a general estimate is roughly 18 months, though this may vary considerably from one institution to another. It can sometimes be perhaps a bit less. In other cases, it will be much longer. But I will say again, a general estimate is roughly 18 months. I should stress, however, that schools should not rush through the process. It's better to be fully prepared and fine-tuned for the internal processes so that the best possible outcome can be achieved. In terms of costs, we're incredibly proud at BGA that we can offer the accreditation at a relatively low cost compared to most accreditation agencies. It's no secret that accreditations can cost anywhere from 30 to 60 to above £1,000 at least. Yikes. And that's not counting implementation costs. Well, with BGA, a full accreditation, not counting the cost of the assessment visit or their accommodation and travel expenses, comes to £15,000. Now, for joint accreditation, it's slightly lower. It's £7,500 for schools that want to do AMBA and BGA accreditation in one go. So, to gain more insight into BGA's accreditation process and even the AMBA and BGA joint accreditation, I've provided a link here where you can go directly to our website and you can download our accreditation criteria, the guidance, and the actual continuous impact model directly. And then finally, I just want to say something quite important here. I'm usually asked many times what the benefits of undergoing accreditation is. Most often than not, schools want to see immediate results in recruitment numbers and the establishment of a strong brand. But how can I tell you, if this is the sole reason you're thinking of doing accreditation, it's probably not for you. Why? Well, let's go back to our original gym metaphor. Accreditation is a continuous improvement process. It allows one to find errors and fix them. And in the case of a business school, it is to improve the experience for their main stakeholders. Accreditation will yield positive results, no doubt, if you focus on the improvement parts, if you follow the recommendations, if you take the process seriously enough. You can go to a marathon race and see all the people finish and feel like you're being left out, like you want to share in the glory of completing the race. But you know, it's easy to forget that the previous to that race, there were 6 months or more of hard training. And it's the training, it's the process that leads to the successful completion of the marathon. So at the end of the day, you should see the accreditation this way. Everything in life is about the process, not about the end result. Focus on the process, focus on improving, enjoy it, and you will surely see positive results as a side effect. So thank you very much, guys. Here are my contact details, and you have my phone number available as well. So if you want to reach out to me directly, feel free to do so. Any questions about accreditation and membership, joint accreditation, or just running a marathon, just get in touch with me. I'll be very happy to speak to you then. So thank you very much, and back over to Paul.
Thanks, Victor. That was fantastic. So we've got time for a Q&A session. So what I'll do is I'll put forward some questions. So the first one's going to go to you, Victor. We've had a question come in. Do you think impact means different things to different schools, and how does BGA measure this?
Well, certainly it can mean different things, and you know, we have a number of various dimensions to do this. When we look at positive impact, we want to see what is your positive impact on your stakeholders. So for instance, in some schools that are in locations where they're in a community that needs a lot of, let's say, support, you may want to measure impact in terms of what your alumni or you say your graduates do for that community. But say your business school has completely different goals or objectives. That impact may look at things such as, you know, the type of research it produces. So impact, the way we measure impact is based on the key strategic objectives that the school has in place. And this will, of course, vary from school to school, from country to country, and we've taken that into account, and hence why the continuous impact model is a very, let's say, has a range of different dimensions where we can explore these areas.
Thank you, excellent. So I'm going to ask a question to Aditya. So Aditya, what would your advice be to schools hoping to build international collaborations with other schools?
Well, my first advice would be get management buy-in. That's very important. Like I said, the stakeholders have to be very committed towards that. It's very, very critical because it's a long-term game. The second part, of course, is perhaps join global, bodies such as the BGA, which we are a member of. Amber, if you can join as members initially, get that exposure. Understand, take it slowly and steadily. That's very, very critical. I've seen a lot of schools who try to hurry into internationalization. It's not a sprint. I remember Victor saying in his presentation, it's a marathon. It's going to take time. It's going to take effort. So you take it slowly, and take it forward from there, and take baby steps. Perhaps start with something very simple in the first year, and then take in further relationships from then, make it deeper. You have to expand both qualitatively, that is, make relationships deeper with partner schools, and quantitatively, where perhaps you may look at more partner schools also. But yes, have stakeholder buy-in, very, very important, and attend international conferences, meet people, get their perspectives. It's a lot of it is networking, to be very honest with you, and then the work starts after that.
Excellent, fantastic. So we've got another question for you, Aditya. How do you ensure that students get the same international learning and networking experience when they're moving courses online?
I think that's a very, very good question. To be very honest with you, what we do is that we ensure that we have a lot of interaction with the partner school or the partner organization where our students are going to be, actually interning or exchanging, etc., and so much so forward. There is a bit of give and take. There are pros and cons. For example, if to be very, very honest with you, you do not get that person-to-person interaction which you would have, or that pure experiential learning which you would have if you were in that place, for example. But at the same time, what happens is there's a far larger canvas by ease of networking, ease of communication. And I've already seen it in the past few months where we've seen that students, perhaps if they'd gone for a physical exchange or a physical internship, maybe they would have met maybe 50, 60 people in the network and got that perspective. But because they're able to do this virtually, that number is now in hundreds. And that's very interesting because a lot of this is also about building a global network, which is there. Of course, it's a challenge. You can perhaps replicate 80% of that entire physical international experience which is there. The 20% which is not replaceable as of now, of course, is that actual person-to-person physical contact. But then I think 80% is a pretty good percentage and figure to go with as of now.
Thank you, excellent. So I've got a question here for Victor. Can BGA help my business school to promote research and our faculty?
Absolutely. We do a number of things for business school members actually to do this. On the one side, we have something called the Trailblazer webinars. And this is actually a fun little series that we run on the side where we promote research that your faculty members have been engaged into. So for instance, we've done a number of webinars now from our current members such as Imperial and SPOL and so forth to promote some of the really cool things that they look into. And we specifically want to look at subjects that deal with sustainability as well and responsible management and how you kind of weave that into best practice in businesses and management. And these are difficult questions, of course, because finding a commercial solution to something that is most often than not costlier than, say, the alternative is there's never an easy solution to that. And so the researchers from our various school members promote their ideas and solutions and, perhaps different practices that businesses can take and experiment with. So we do that for your faculty. And if you want to have your faculty promote that, just get in touch with me and we'll happily get them on board the Trailblazer webinars. In terms of other type of exposure for your school, we have the business impact, which I showed you a bit earlier on. And we've got a fantastic database of different articles and research that deal with contemporary issues with the business school, management education, and beyond that. So if your school wants or works on something that's, let's say, you think is unique, or you're dealing with tackling an issue that perhaps other schools haven't really done before, or you're doing it differently and you want to build a little bit of attention around that, we'll happily get in touch with you and promote that via Business Impact. And Business Impact goes out to all our business schools, to the entire network, and we also send out physical copies every quarter as well to schools. So these are some areas that we can do to work with you to promote, faculty work and the school as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Victor. I've got another question for you. Can BGA help with student recruitment?
Well, this is a question. It goes back to my last slide actually, and it's, of course it can, but it depends. That's the best answer I can give here, and the reason for that is, let's say you're a school that goes through the accreditation process, and for your school, that the whole idea is to get the badge and slap that onto your website, and hopefully that's the end all be all for you. If that has been your entire purpose to the accreditation process, you will likely not see more numbers in terms of recruitment numbers. And in fact, an AMBA, where you could arguably say it's right now much more well-known brand, of course, because BGA is a much newer brand. There have been schools that have done the AMBA accreditation process and not seen a massive intake in students as well. And those, we know what those schools are and why they don't do so well sometimes, and then they lose their accreditation. So it's about putting the attention into the process. Listen to what the assessors tell you, what kind of expert advice they give you. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the right advice they give you, but it allows you to think about what different ways you can experiment with your programs and your alumni and career services to further improve the school. Mentioned again, it is a marathon, and a lot of attention to the work and the details and improving the school will in the end yield in higher student numbers, and that's something that is not just something we say at BGA, but it should be a life philosophy in general. We are so focused on just seeing, well, we want higher recruitment numbers, or we want to be the #1 ranked school, but honestly, no one gets ranked #1 like just like that. It's the internal process and work, and if you really put attention to detail there and work your way through the process and really cherish that process as well, things are going to work out well. And so it's a general philosophy that you should employ for the business school and the entire organization, of course.
Thank you, excellent. So I'm going to pass over to Aditya. So I've got a question for you. Should business schools be considering more international authors, industry partners, and regional case studies to support internationalization, and how can they do this?
Oh, absolutely. They must absolutely do that. That's critical. A lot of time, I think business schools tend to be slightly inward looking at only context which is related to their economy or their immediate geography. Look, that's changed. That world is gone, and it won't come back. You need to look at international authors, you need to look at international case studies, you need to look at case studies which perhaps may not have a direct impact now to your students, but perhaps in a couple of years or in a decade they may. And I think that's very important. To give you a small example, I mean, Amazon, for example, when we started in 2012, e-commerce was not that big in India. It was there, the shoots were there, but it wasn't that big. But as a policy, we made sure that all the students had a case study on Amazon, understanding how the entire growth process, and that actually helped our students, because 3 or 4 years later, boom, e-commerce exploded in the market, and that actually helped a lot of our students. Similarly, when you have international authors, their context, their perception of things is something which may be very refreshing. I mean, in the end, one must understand we are creating corporate leaders in our business schools. We're not merely creating managers. And one of the major important things for them is they are not only going to be people who are going to follow instructions, they're people who are going to take major decisions. They're going to be people who are going to influence decision making, perhaps in a few years in their career. So it's very important for them to have that sense of a global context and be able to understand things from all over the world. We do it definitely at Athena, and we encourage all schools, please do that. It's very, very difficult. It's a fantastic question. I think you must do it.
Excellent, thank you. So I think we've got time for 2 more questions. So the first one will be for you, Aditya. How do you see the future of business education changing in the next 10 years?
That's a very, very interesting question. I mean, I wish I was Nostradamus and I could have given you a complete prediction on this. But I think what I do know is that there are going to be some aspects which are going to be very traditional that won't change. Uh, we will keep looking at people coming into campuses to study because let's face it, I mean, a lot of that is with the entire environment, the entire atmosphere, the physical environment is there. That is something which a lot of us in business schools can charge a premium for. So that is something which is going to stay. The way that the knowledge is spent to the student, that's going to change completely. It's going to be more online, more asynchronous. I mean, let's be very, very honest. If you have a world-class faculty who can spend 25 hours with you across a particular course, would you rather have it him giving lectures about concepts which you can study on the internet, or just have a seat on the video, or would you rather spend those 25 hours, all of them actually discussing existential questions about business, about concepts, perhaps talking to them about different case studies? It's about that in the end. It's about that being and doing stage is going to get replicated a lot. Another input is with regards to internships. We're going to see multiple internships happening. To give you a small context, at Athena, we do multiple internships. We do an internship every semester. But I think it's going to become even more frequent than that. Gone are the days, perhaps in a couple of years, with the gig economy coming in, we're going to see students doing only one company's internship in the space of the internship. They may do multiple companies, and that's fantastic. That gives a fantastic perspective. So a lot of interesting changes, and yes, obviously, finally, a lot of digital things come into play. Virtualization. It's going to be very interesting. Schools have to adapt. That's going to be critical for us to survive in the brave new world.
Thank you. And the last question is going to be for Victor. So Victor, do you think the future of education will be about stackable certificates and micro-credentials as opposed to degrees?
Yeah, I love this question, actually. You know, with regards to stack, I don't think there will be one over the other, but I will say probably as we start seeing the world develop right now, we're going to see a definite growth in the market for stackable certificates. And here's why. If you're a student, for instance, these days, and you're studying in the US, let's take the US as an example. You're going to rack up so much student debt. I mean, we're talking past $100,000 sometimes for a full education. Now, it's not that long ago that I went through and did my education myself, and the pain in having that massive debt and then having to pay that back the tuition is not going any lower, it's going up. Then you've got the other side of the whole question as well, where you look at the way the economy is currently developing, and can you really afford to take 2, 3, 4 years out of your life and not being in the workforce and just sit in a classroom all day? You know, the truth is, if we really want to be more optimized and get our life started right away, stackable certificates makes a lot of sense. There's also the lifelong learning component here. If you have, let's say, undergone an education, you got your master's at whatever university, and you did digital marketing, well, if that was 10 years ago, guess what? Your knowledge is out of date. So one of the things you want to do, of course, is update your knowledge. And some of the best ways that you can do that is through a stackable certificate. So something within digital marketing. And surprisingly enough, and this is a gold mine. And I'm telling you guys, this is a gold mine for business schools, because I certainly would love this, and all other all my friends that I've gone to uni with would love this as well, is to offer your alumni lifelong learning opportunities of stackable certificates to continuously learn and advance, let's say, in one's career, but not only one's career, in one's understanding as well. And a lot of business schools and universities in general don't do this. So I think there's a market for both. You're going to see, regular degree programs, but the stackable certificates are going to grow. And if your school is not looking at this area right now, well, guess what? Other schools are going to run past you, and they're going to be offering that to probably your own alumni. So give that a thought and you know, really think about how you can engage your alumni in the lifelong learning process. This is also a key component to the BGA accreditation process. And what we do is help schools kind of come up with some ideas on what they can do to support their alumni through a lifelong learning, and as well as look at options such as stackable certificates.
Thank you, Victor and Aditya, for a fantastic session. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for today, and that brings us to a close for this week of the Business School Leaders Forum. Just before we go, we've got 12 more sessions taking place next week. The first one will be on Monday at 2 p.m. BST with Chris Dixon and Alan Goody, who'll be presenting case studies on digital innovation at business schools. Following that session, we have got another session at 3:30 BST, which will be with Instructure, who'll be discussing technology as an enabler in management, education, and supporting lifelong learning. So in the chat function, I have dropped the link so you can join those sessions and register. Also, you've got the details there to view any of the sessions which have taken place, the recordings. So yeah, just before we go, I'd like to thank Victor and Aditya again for their time, for a fantastic session, and everyone who has joined the Business School Leaders this week. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and a
Thank you.
privilege to be here.